was folding laundry in the living room when my phone buzzed with a notification from our new doorbell camera motion detected at front door. I almost ignored it thinking it was just the mailman, but something made me tap the notification, and what I saw on that tiny screen destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. There was my husband Derek, the man who hadn't walked in 5 years, the man I had bathed and fed and dressed every single day, the man whose wheelchair I had pushed through countless hospital corridors, standing upright on our front porch, stretching his arms above his head, and checking his watch like he was waiting for someone, not just standing but bouncing on his feet, rolling his neck, looking perfectly healthy, and completely unaware that his devoted wife was watching him from her office 20 minutes away. My name is Brianna, and for 5 years I gave up everything, my career, my friends, my dreams, my entire identity to care for a husband who I believed was paralyzed from the waist down. I changed his diapers, I bathed him, I lifted him in and out of bed until my back screamed in pain. I cried myself to sleep countless nights, mourning the active life we used to share while he lay beside me pretending to be trapped in a body that didn't work. And the whole time, all 5 years of sacrifice and suffering and unconditional love, he was lying, he was walking, he was living a completely different life the moment I left for work every morning. This is the story of how I discovered the truth and how I made him pay for every single day he stole from me. Let me take you back to where it all began. Derek and I met at a mutual friend's barbecue when I was 28 years old. He was handsome in that effortless way some men have, with dark hair, bright blue eyes, and a smile that made me forget how to form complete sentences. He worked in pharmaceutical sales, which meant good money and flexible hours, and I was a rising star at an architecture firm designing buildings that would outlast both of us. We clicked immediately, spending that whole barbecue talking in the corner, ignoring everyone else, and by the time he asked for my number, I was already imagining our future together. We dated for 2 years before he proposed during a sunset picnic at the beach where we'd had our first real date. I said yes before he even finished the question, and we were married 6 months later in a beautiful ceremony at a vineyard in Napa Valley, surrounded by 150 friends and family members who all said we were the perfect couple, and for a while we were. Derek was attentive and romantic, surprising me with flowers and planning weekend getaways and telling me every day how lucky he was to have found me. I thought I had won the lottery. I thought I would be happy forever. I had no idea that the man I married was a performance, and that eventually the actor would get tired of playing his role. The first year of marriage was bliss, the second year was comfortable, the third year was when things started to change. Derek became distant, spending more time at work, taking business trips that seemed to get longer each time, coming home tired and distracted. I told myself it was just the natural evolution of marriage, that the honeymoon phase couldn't last forever, that we would find our rhythm and reconnect when things settled down. I was so busy with my own career, designing a major hospital complex that would become my signature project, that I didn't notice how much space had grown between us until it was too late. The accident happened on a Thursday afternoon in March 5 years ago. I was in a meeting with clients when my phone started buzzing repeatedly, which was unlike me to ignore, but the presentation was important, and I figured I could call back during the break. When I finally checked my messages, I had 7 missed calls from Derek's office, 3 from an unknown number, and 1 voicemail from a nurse at St. Luke's Hospital. "Your husband has been in an accident," she said, her voice professionally calm. "He's in surgery now. You should come as quickly as you can." I don't remember driving to the hospital, don't remember parking or running through the automatic doors or demanding information from the woman at the front desk. What I remember is sitting in a sterile waiting room for 4 hours until a surgeon came out with exhaustion carved into his face. "Mrs. Patterson, your husband is stable," he said, "but I'm afraid I have difficult news. The accident caused significant damage to his spinal cord at the T10 level. Based on our initial assessment, it's unlikely he'll regain function in his lower extremities. I'm so sorry." The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital rooms and medical consultations and learning terminology I never wanted to know. T10, complete paraplegia they called it, meaning Derek had no sensation or movement from the waist down. He would need a wheelchair for the rest of his life, would need assistance with basic functions, would need constant care and support. I remember looking at him in that hospital bed, his blue eyes filled with tears, telling me he would understand if I wanted to leave. If this wasn't what I signed up for, I held his hand and promised him I wasn't going anywhere, that we would face this together, that my love wasn't conditional on whether or not he could walk. I quit my job 3 months later. The hospital project was handed off to a colleague who would eventually win an award for my design, while I learned how to transfer my husband from bed to wheelchair, how to manage his catheter, how to watch for pressure sores and signs of infection. I became his full-time caregiver, his nurse, his physical therapist, his emotional support, and slowly, invisibly, I stopped being myself. I stopped being Brianna, the architect Brianna who ran marathons and dreamed of traveling the world and laughed so loud people in restaurants would turn to look. I became simply Derek's wife, the woman who pushed his wheelchair, the woman whose entire existence revolved around a man who couldn't even feel her touch. The money wasn't a problem at first. We had savings, and Derek received a settlement from the accident plus disability payments that covered our basic expenses, but caring for a paralyzed spouse is expensive in ways I never anticipated: the wheelchair ramps and bathroom modifications, the medical equipment, the countless doctor visits, the medications that insurance only partially covered. Within 2 years we had burned through our savings, and I had to find a way to bring in income without leaving Derek alone for too long. I started freelancing, doing small architectural projects from home, working at my laptop while Derek watched television or slept. The money helped, but it was nothing compared to what I used to earn, nothing compared to the career I had sacrificed. Then my grandmother died and left me her estate, nearly $900,000 in cash, investments and property. I cried when I heard the news, not just from grief, but from relief. Finally we could stop worrying about money. Finally I could hire some help, maybe even go back to work part-time. Finally there might be something left of my life beyond these four walls. But Derek had other ideas. We should invest it wisely, he said. Let me handle the finances. You've got enough on your plate taking care of me. I was too tired, too grateful to have one less thing to worry about, to question him. I signed whatever papers he put in front of me, and trusted that he would take care of us the way I had been taking care of him. The next 3 years were the hardest of my life. My health deteriorated from the constant physical strain of caregiving. My back was perpetually in pain. My hands developed carpal tunnel from pushing his wheelchair and lifting his dead weight. I gained 40 pounds because I was too exhausted to exercise and too depressed to care what I ate. My friends stopped calling after I cancelled plans one too many times, and I couldn't blame them. Who wants to hear about catheter bags and pressure sores and the soul-crushing monotony of watching your husband stare at the same television shows day after day? I was 34 years old and I felt like my life was already over. Derek, on the other hand, seemed to be adjusting remarkably well to his disability. He was always cheerful when I was around, always grateful, always telling me what an amazing wife I was, how he couldn't survive without me. He started a blog about living with paralysis that gained a modest following, and he spent hours on his laptop supposedly writing and connecting with other disabled people. I was proud of him for finding purpose. I was inspired by his resilience. I had no idea that his cheerfulness came from the secret life he was living the moment I walked out the door. The doorbell camera was my sister Jenna's idea. She visited one weekend, the first time anyone had come to see us in months, and was appalled by how exhausted I looked. You need help, she said firmly. You need to take better care of yourself before you collapse. I told her I couldn't afford a caregiver, that Derek's disability payments and my freelance income barely covered our expenses, that grandma's inheritance was invested, and Derek said we shouldn't touch the principal. She looked at me with something like pity and said, at least let me buy you a security system. You're alone in this house with a vulnerable husband. What if something happened? I protested, but she insisted, and a week later a technician arrived to install cameras at the front door, back door, and garage. I didn't think much about the cameras after they were installed. They were just another thing on my phone, another set of notifications to ignore while I managed medications and prepared special meals and helped Derek with his physical therapy exercises that he always said were too painful to push, too hard, exercises that never seemed to produce any improvement at all. I accepted that this was my life now, that I would spend my best years caring for a man who would never get better, that love meant sacrifice, and my sacrifice was everything I used to be. The notification came on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after the cameras were installed. I was at a coffee shop working on a freelance project, the first time I had left the house for anything other than groceries in weeks. Derek had insisted I go, said I was looking pale and needed fresh air and sunshine. I should have been grateful for his concern. Instead, I was suspicious. It was the first time in years he had encouraged me to leave him alone, and some small voice in the back of my mind whispered that something was wrong. When my phone buzzed with a camera alert, I opened it automatically, expecting to see a delivery driver or a stray cat. What I saw instead stopped my heart. Derek was standing on the front porch, not in his wheelchair, not struggling to support himself on crutches, but standing normally, casually, like a man who had never known a day of paralysis in his life. He was wearing workout clothes I didn't recognize, and he was stretching his legs, actually stretching, doing lunges on the porch of the house where I had spent 5 years believing he couldn't feel anything below his waist. I watched frozen as a car pulled into our driveway and a woman got out, young, blonde, beautiful, the kind of woman who turned heads everywhere she went. Derek walked down the porch steps to meet her and wrapped her in an embrace that was anything but friendly. Then they got in her car together and drove away, leaving his wheelchair empty in the living room like a prop from a play that was finally over. I don't remember driving home, don't remember walking through the front door or standing in the living room staring at that empty wheelchair trying to make sense of what I had seen. What I do remember is the rage that rose up inside me like nothing I had ever felt before, hot and cold at the same time, overwhelming every other emotion, until all that remained was a crystal clear determination to destroy the man who had destroyed me. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't confront him when he wheeled himself back through the door that evening, pretending to be exhausted from a long day of doing nothing. I smiled and made him dinner and asked about his blog and waited, because revenge served hot is satisfying but revenge served cold is devastating. The next day I called in sick to the coffee shop project and instead drove to the public library where I could use a computer without leaving any trace on our home network. I spent 8 hours researching everything I could find about Derek's accident, his disability claims, his finances, our legal options. I discovered that faking a disability to collect insurance payments and government benefits is federal fraud punishable by years in prison. I discovered that obtaining money through deception in a marriage is grounds for civil action. I discovered that my grandmother's inheritance, which Derek had promised to invest wisely, had been slowly drained over the past 3 years, transferred to accounts I didn't know existed. I discovered that I had been married to a monster, and the monster had been robbing me blind while I wiped his ass and told him I loved him. The woman's name was Kaylee Morgan. I found her through Derek's credit card statements, which I accessed using the password. He thought I didn't know he had been paying for her apartment, her car, her credit cards, her vacations, flights to Miami and Cancun and Hawaii trips he had taken, while telling me he was visiting a specialist in another city. She was 29 years old, a fitness instructor at a gym downtown, and based on her social media she had been dating my husband for at least 4 years. She called him D in her posts and talked about their future together, the house they would buy, the children they would have, the life they were building, while I rotted away in a prison of my husband's making. I wanted to confront him immediately, wanted to walk into the living room and play the video on the big screen TV and watch his face as he realized his performance was over. But I knew that would be a mistake. Derek was smart enough to fool doctors and insurance investigators and me for 5 years. If I confronted him without ironclad evidence, he would find a way to spin it, would claim the video was manipulated, would gaslight me into doubting what I had seen with my own eyes. I needed more. I needed everything, and I was willing to wait as long as it took to get it. I started documenting everything, saving every camera recording to a cloud account. He didn't know about taking screenshots of financial transactions, photographing his medical equipment that he apparently only used when I was home. I hired a private investigator named Rosa who specialized in insurance fraud, and she uncovered even more than I had found on my own. Derek's accident had been real, but his paralysis had not. The initial injury had been minor, a herniated disc that required surgery but would have healed completely within 6 months. Instead, Derek had bribed a medical assistant to alter his records, had faked his symptoms during examinations, had performed his role of paralyzed husband so convincingly that no one ever thought to question it. He had collected over $400,000 in disability payments and insurance settlements, all while living a double life with a woman half my age. Rosa also discovered what had happened to my grandmother's inheritance. Derek had transferred nearly $800,000 to offshore accounts, investments in Kaylee's name, and a down payment on a beach house in Costa Rica where he apparently planned to retire once he had squeezed every last dollar from our marriage from me. He had never loved me, had probably never even liked me. I was just a mark, a source of income, a stepping stone to the life he really wanted, and I had played my part perfectly. The devoted wife who never questioned, never doubted, never stopped to wonder why her paralyzed husband always seemed so happy. The hardest part was continuing to play my role while the investigation proceeded. Every morning I woke up and helped Derek into his wheelchair, knowing he would stand up the moment I left. Every evening I came home and cooked his dinner and asked about his day and pretended to believe his lies. I changed his catheter that he didn't need, massaged his legs that worked perfectly fine, told him I loved him while fantasizing about watching him be dragged away in handcuffs. It was the best acting performance of my life, and unlike Derek, I wasn't doing it for money, I was doing it for justice. My lawyer Michelle Torres was a shark in a silk blouse, a woman who had built her career on destroying men who thought they could get away with treating women like disposable commodities. When I showed her the evidence I had gathered, her eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. We're going to bury him, she said. And she meant it. We spent 2 months building the case, coordinating with federal prosecutors who were very interested in Derek's disability fraud filing for divorce in a way that would freeze all his assets and prevent him from fleeing to Costa Rica. We planned everything down to the smallest detail, and then we set the trap. I told Derek I had been invited to a week-long architecture conference in Chicago, a chance to reconnect with my former colleagues and maybe revive my career. He was supportive as always, telling me I deserved a break, encouraging me to take all the time I needed. What he didn't know was that I wasn't going to Chicago. I was going to a hotel 3 miles from our house where I would watch through the cameras as he revealed his true self, and federal agents waited for my signal to move in. The first day I was gone, Derek maintained his act, staying in his wheelchair, taking calls from his disability caseworker, working on his fraudulent blog about life with paralysis. But by day 2, he couldn't resist anymore. I watched through the cameras as he stood up from his wheelchair and stretched arms above his head, twisting his torso like a man who had been sitting too long at a desk. He walked to the kitchen, made himself lunch, did squats while waiting for the microwave, walked to the garage and pulled out a bicycle that I had never seen before, and rode away, presumably to meet Kaylee. I saved every second of footage, my heart pounding with anticipation. On day 3 he brought Kaylee to our house, to my house, the house where I had sacrificed everything to care for him. They walked through the front door holding hands, laughing about something I couldn't hear on the camera's audio. I watched them tour the rooms while Derek pointed out what they would change once I was gone. They sat on my couch and made plans for their future while I recorded everything and sent it to Michelle and the federal prosecutors. When they went upstairs to my bedroom to do things I couldn't bear to watch, I called Rosa. Derek's time was up. The arrest happened at 6 a.m. on a Thursday morning. I was back home by then, having returned from my fake conference the night before. Derek was sleeping peacefully beside me when the doorbell rang, followed immediately by pounding and shouts of "FBI, open up." I pretended to be confused and frightened as agents swarmed into our bedroom and ordered Derek to stand up. He tried to maintain his act at first, claiming he couldn't move, that someone would have to lift him into his wheelchair, but the lead agent just smiled. "Sir, we have video evidence of you walking, running, cycling, and engaging in various physical activities over the past week. Would you like to continue this performance, or would you like to stand up and put your hands behind your back?" Watching Derek's face in that moment was worth every second of the 5 years I had lost, the confusion giving way to realization, giving way to pure animal panic as he understood that his careful deception had completely collapsed. He looked at me, hoping, I think, for some sign of sympathy, some indication that I would help him talk his way out of this, but all he saw was cold satisfaction. I stood there in my bathrobe, arms crossed, watching as they handcuffed him and read him his rights and told him he was being charged with federal disability fraud, wire fraud, and theft by deception. "You," he whispered as they led him past me, his blue eyes wide with disbelief. "You knew you planned this." I smiled the way he had smiled at me for 5 years, warm and caring and completely fake, and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart, I'm sure they'll take good care of you." The divorce was finalized 4 months later, and thanks to Michelle's expertise, I got everything: the house, the remaining investments, the proceeds from selling the Costa Rica property that Derek had bought with my grandmother's money. Even the beach house he had purchased in Kaylee's name was seized by federal authorities and sold to pay restitution. Derek's disability payments were terminated, and he was ordered to repay every dollar he had fraudulently received, plus penalties and interest. By the time the legal proceedings were finished, he owed the government nearly $800,000 and had been sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for fraud and theft. Kaylee didn't escape consequences either. She was charged as an accessory to fraud for knowingly participating in Derek's scheme and accepting money she knew was stolen. She pleaded guilty to avoid trial and received 2 years in prison plus 5 years of probation. I heard through Rosa that her fitness instructor career was over, that her social media had been deleted, that she had become a cautionary tale among her former friends, the woman who threw her future away for a married man who was lying to everyone, including her. The first year after Derek's arrest was harder than I expected, not because I missed him, but because I had to relearn how to be myself after 5 years of being nothing but his caretaker. I went to therapy, worked through the trauma of what he had done to me and the guilt I felt for not seeing through his deception sooner. I started exercising again, losing the 40 pounds I had gained, and then some. I reconnected with old friends who welcomed me back with open arms and apologized for not checking in more during my years of isolation. I started designing again, small projects at first, then bigger ones, until eventually a former colleague offered me a position at her firm and I was finally back where I belonged. I met someone new 2 years after the divorce, a man named James who works in environmental law and actually means it when he asks how my day was. He knows everything about Derek, knows about the 5 years I lost, knows about the trust issues I still struggle with, and he's patient in ways I didn't know men could be patient. We're not rushing anything, not making promises we might not be able to keep, but for the first time in nearly a decade I feel like I have a future that's mine to shape, not someone else's lie to maintain. I got a letter from Derek last month, written from the federal prison where he's serving his sentence. He claimed he was sorry that he had made terrible mistakes, that he still loved me and hoped someday I could forgive him. I read it once, then tore it into pieces and threw them in the trash. Some apologies are too late to matter, and some betrayals are too deep to forgive. He didn't make mistakes, he made choices every single day for 5 years. He chose To lie to me, chose to steal from me, chose to let me destroy my health and career and happiness while he lived a secret life with another woman. Those weren't mistakes, they were crimes, and he's exactly where he belongs. My sister Jenna jokes sometimes that she saved my life by buying me that doorbell camera, and honestly she might be right. If I hadn't seen that footage, I might have spent the rest of my life caring for a man who was perfectly capable of caring for himself. Might have died early from the stress and physical strain while Derek inherited everything and ran off to Costa Rica with his girlfriend. The camera cost $200 and it saved me from losing everything. So if you're reading this and something feels wrong in your relationship, if your partner's story doesn't quite add up, if you have that nagging feeling that you're being played, trust yourself. Set up a camera, check the bank accounts, do whatever you have to do to find the truth, because the truth is always better than a beautiful lie, even when it hurts. I'm 41 now, 5 years older than when I watched my husband stand up on that camera footage, and 5 years wiser about the ways people can deceive you when you love them enough to stop asking questions. My back still hurts sometimes, a reminder of all those years of lifting and carrying and pushing a man who could have walked on his own 2 feet. I have gray hairs I didn't have before and lines on my face that weren't there when I said I do, but I also have something I didn't have for a very long time. I have hope, I have a career I'm proud of, a relationship that feels real, friends who actually know me, and a future that I get to design myself, just like the buildings I create on paper. Derek will be released in 3 more years, and I've already made sure I'll know the moment he steps out of prison, not because I'm afraid of him, but because I want to know where he ends up. Want to watch from a distance as he tries to rebuild a life with nothing. The money is gone, Kaylee is gone, his reputation is gone. Even his own mother stopped speaking to him after the trial when she learned what he had done to the daughter-in-law she had always liked. He'll be 45 years old with a federal fraud conviction and no skills beyond lying and manipulation. I almost feel sorry for him, almost. But then I remember all those mornings I woke up exhausted, all those nights I cried myself to sleep, all those years I gave away to a man who was laughing at me behind my back, and it almost disappears completely. The house where it all happened, where I spent 5 years as a prisoner of my husband's deception, I sold it 6 months after the divorce. I couldn't stand being in those rooms anymore, couldn't look at the bathroom where I had bathed him, or the bedroom where he had pretended to need my help, or the kitchen where I had made his meals while my own health fell apart. I used the money to buy a condo downtown with big windows and lots of light and no memories of Derek at all. I donated his wheelchair to a charity for people with actual disabilities, people who would have given anything for the mobility my husband was hiding, and I threw away everything else that reminded me of those lost years, every medical supply, every piece of adaptive equipment, every photograph of the man I thought I had married. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never installed those cameras, if I had continued believing the lie for another 5 years, another 10, another 20. Would I have ever figured it out, or would I have died still thinking I was a devoted wife caring for a husband who needed me? I like to think I would have discovered the truth eventually, that some part of me knew something was wrong and would have kept pushing until I found it. But I'm grateful I didn't have to wait, grateful that technology gave me the proof I needed to break free from a prison I didn't even know I was in. My name is Brianna, and for 5 years I was married to a man who faked paralysis to steal my money, my career, and my life. He thought he was smarter than me, thought I would never figure out the truth, thought he could keep performing forever, but he was wrong, because eventually every actor gets tired, every lie gets harder to maintain, and every victim eventually opens their eyes. I opened mine at 36 years old, and what I saw on that doorbell camera changed everything. It destroyed the life I thought I had. But it also gave me the chance to build something real, something honest, something that belongs to me and not to a man who never deserved me in the first place. If Derek could read this, I would want him to know that I don't hate him anymore. Hatred requires too much energy, and I've already wasted enough of my life on him. What I feel now is something closer to pity. He had a wife who loved him completely, who would have done anything for him, who gave up everything she valued to take care of him, and he threw it all away for money and a younger woman and a fantasy of escape that was never going to come true. He's 43 years old, sitting in a prison cell with nothing but time to think about what he lost, and I'm 41 years old, sitting in my beautiful condo with a man who loves me and a career that fulfills me and a future that's brighter than anything Derek and I ever had together. He thought he was winning, but he lost everything, and I'm the one who's finally free. The last thing I want to say is this to anyone who's reading this and recognizing something in my story, anyone who feels trapped in a relationship that doesn't feel right, anyone whose partner makes them feel crazy for asking questions or suspicious for wanting proof. You're not crazy, you're not paranoid, you're not a bad person for doubting someone who claims to love you. Trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy, and anyone who truly loves you will understand that they need to earn your trust through consistent, honest behavior, not through manipulation and guilt and making you feel like you're the problem. If something feels wrong, it probably is, and you deserve to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I found my truth on a doorbell camera at 36 years old, and it was the worst and best moment of my life. Worst because it confirmed that everything I believed was a lie. Best because it set me free from a man who would have drained me completely if I had let him. Derek is in prison. Kaylee is a cautionary tale. And I am finally living the life I was always meant to live. That's not revenge, that's justice, and justice in the end is the only thing that really matters.